All right. How are we? Good. Good to see you. My name is Bryan. And yeah, a little bit about me. I moved. My wife is right here. She always hates when I do this, but she's right here. And we've been married we just celebrated 16 years of marriage, which is crazy. That makes me feel about 70 years old to say. And her and I, we moved to the middle of downtown in January 2011. If you know downtown, we moved to a duplex at the corner of 27th and California Street, where the 5 streets of 5 Points come together to make 5 Points. And within walking distance of Coors Field, we started a church out of our duplex, and we grew, and we helped start some other churches in downtown Denver. This past October, God kindly and clearly called us into a season of kind of rest and recovery from doing that for a dozen years, particularly post-COVID. And yeah, what I do now is I run a couple of businesses. One, I just help athletes, entrepreneurs, just high-performing people, like not burn down the rest of their life as they achieve significant things. Like I'm really passionate about helping people do hard things with heart. Because we're not just thinking and doing creatures, but we're feeling creatures because we were designed in the image of God. And so I try to just come alongside and champion people to do hard things in really healthy ways. And then I also run a business called A Generous Company that's all about helping businesses leverage thoughtful generosity for the sake of making the most significant impact for what they do and what they're called into doing. So I love getting to talk about generosity. I know it's kind of weird having a guy you don't know come in and talk about something as sensitive as generosity. I'm kind of like this weird uncle you've never met before who's like going to talk about politics at the Thanksgiving dinner or something like that. And I'm just super honored to be here. And even I was just thinking about that as you were talking about Parker and Jess, who anytime I've been around exude joy. Like I feel more joyful in any interaction I've ever had with them. But just so thankful for them, thankful for the invitation to be here. And yeah, we'll get after it. We're going to be in Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12. And I think can we bring the passage up? I'm just going to read it, and then I'll dive into what we're particularly diving into with generosity. So we're in Mark chapter 12. I'm going to start in verse 38. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. But a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything, all she had to live on." Okay, so we're going to dive into this. Let me start that. Actually, as I was reading that, I was like, I wanted to say one other thing. It was really cool. I was thinking about this, but then y'all kind of named this. I'm really thankful that Parker and Jess are away. And I'm thankful that you celebrate that, because I think a lot of times in startup hustle culture, there can be this sort of expectation of heroism that never gives somebody a break. And I'll tell you, on the other side of being a hero is eventually being a martyr. And you don't want that. You want a culture of rest and recovery. And so not only are they away for an extended period of time, but you guys celebrate that as a reflection of the health of your culture, and God is honored as the consequence, okay? So that makes me really excited to be here as well. All right, so here's another thing about me, and I don't know if you'll think differently about me on the other side of sharing this, but this was one of the, like during COVID, people got into all sorts of weird things, baking sourdough and all that sort of stuff. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, I got back into baseball. Do we have any baseball fans here? I know it's like baseball is kind of something that your granddad likes, but it's your granddad and me and a few of you. And I got way back into baseball. I kind of grew up playing it. I played it in college for a little bit. I had nothing to do with it for a while, and then I got back into baseball during COVID. And I don't know if you know this, but this past week was the All-Star game. Did anybody watch the Major League Baseball All-Star game? This is why viewership is an issue. You and me, my friend, you and me. But whenever that happens, it reminds me that, I don't know if you know this, but Denver hosted the All-Star game a couple of years ago. And I wasn't going to go. Tickets were going to be expensive, but I was actually sitting at the table with my wife. We have 4 kids. At the time, we only had 3, and I gathered them around. I was trying to do this dad talk to let them know, hey, the Major League Baseball All-Star Game is coming to Denver, and it's a big deal, and it only happens once every 30 years. As soon as I said that, I started doing the math in my head that I'd be like 70 the next time it comes to Denver, and I had a bit of an existential crisis, and I was like, I don't care how expensive it is to go, I'm going to go. So basically that evening, I bought 2 tickets, one for me and one for my oldest daughter, Hannah, and we went. Now, we did not get great tickets. We weren't sitting super close or anything like that. We sat in center field. We did not sit in the rock pile in center field. We sat right below the rock pile. And because it was such a rare event, we decided to kind of make a whole day of it. We went down to Blake Street early. We got in early. As soon as the gates opened, we got in there. We're going to watch batting practice. We're going to watch our favorite players. This is going to be awesome. So our seats are in center field. And we get there early enough to watch the players take batting practice. And they're, hitting homers, and it's going to the stands left and right, and people are getting balls. And I make this promise in my heart, I'm going to get my daughter a ball. I'm going to do it. Like, I'm kind of before God. If it comes close to me, I'm going to get it. So the balls are kind of getting hit to the left and to the right. And eventually this crazy thing happens where the guy who was shagging flies in center field has a ball hit to him, and he turns around and he throws it right into our section, right in my direction. And I'm like, okay, this is it. God's opened the door, and I'm going to walk through it, okay? So he throws it, and I jump up as much as possible, and it kind of deflects off my hands because, it was a wild mosh pit of equally eager dads to make memories for their kids. And the ball falls into the bleachers, and I just dive in to go after it, okay? So I'm in this pile trying to grab for the ball, and another guy grabs the ball, and rather than acting like a normal human being and pulling his hand back, he kind of pushes his hand forward and he punches me straight in the nose, ball first. And I hear a pop, and everything goes black, and everything just kind of goes quiet, and I just sort of like, in a disoriented way, get up, and I look out, and I look up, and everybody is looking at me like something is horribly wrong. So I put my hand up to my face, and it's just covered in blood. And everybody's yelling. My daughter's yelling because she was she was only 6 at the time, like was at the pile of these eager dads, trying to get a ball. People are yelling for security to come help. People are yelling for medical professionals to come help. People are yelling at the guy who broke my nose with the ball to give my daughter the ball. He's yelling back, "No, it's mine. I got it fair and square." It was a weird situation. Everybody is screaming. Here, I want to show you a picture of this. Here it is. This was later. I'll get to this point, but here it is. And I just want to do this for the sake of doing it. Can you go back? Okay. This guy is the one who broke my nose, okay? So if you know him, I'm still trying to forgive him. And okay, so just stay here for a second. So get up, break my nose, blood everywhere. They immediately come, they rush. They get me to, I don't know if you know this, but Coors Field has like an in-stadium emergency room, mostly for people who drank too much and like fall down. And I'm in there with the people who drank too much before the game had even started. I had not been drinking, by the way. I just want to say that as well. I was just in there with my broken nose. Go in, see the emergency room doctor in Coors Field. He says, "You broke your nose. There's nothing you can do about it. You can go back out if you want to." Of course, we want to go back. We spend a lot of money to go there. Now, here's where it gets good, okay? We go back to our seats. We get a standing ovation. As we return, people start sending my daughter like snacks during the game. So if we can go to this next one, this was like the 3rd inning. They sent her nachos. Around the 7th inning, they sent her cotton candy here. And she was like, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to us," right? She was like, "This is amazing. This is the best thing that's ever happened to us." Now, can we go back to the first picture? Now, here's the question, if you've been listening carefully to the story I've been telling you, here's the question you should be asking is, do you notice something in her hand? A ball. So how did she get a ball? Did the guy have a change of heart later in the game and give her a ball? No, he did not. He was like Gollum with the one true ring to like rule them all. Like, this is mine. This is my ball. I got it fair and square. No, but he held on to it. Okay, so how did Hannah, that's my oldest daughter, get a ball? Let me tell you. Here's how. Is that not long after that dude broke my nose, this probably 16-year-old kid, about 10 rows behind, where all of this was going down, made his way through the crowd with a ball that he had caught earlier in the day and gave it to my daughter and said, I don't need this, you can have this. And she still has that ball to this day. She loves telling this story to this day. She told the story multiple times this past week because she knew the All-Star game was going on. It's one of her favorite things that she's ever experienced, and bizarrely kind of redeemed the entire experience. Now, the reason I start with that story is I want to give you a glimpse into the kind of people we are called to be in cultural moments of chaos. That in the midst of moments of anxiety, God calls us and invites us to demonstrate generosity. And when we are generous, non-anxious individuals in moments of chaos and selfishness and self-preservation, legacies are made that impact people for generations as a consequence. Okay? Generosity in the midst of anxiety is unbelievably powerful. And you and I, we exist in a cultural moment that is overwhelmed with anxiety, overwhelmed with self-preservation, overwhelmed with extremism, overwhelmed with our alarmism. And as a consequence, you can instinctually feel that the most natural, maybe even you can even justify it as the wisest thing to do is you have to watch out for yourself and your family if things are going to be okay. But generosity in the midst of anxiety makes an impact that impacts people for the rest of their lives. This is one of the reasons I love talking about generosity is because I understand, I'm not sure how you feel. I don't know you well enough, but I think it's easy instinctually to, hear a series about generosity and kind of be like, generosity is sort of this obligatory duty of something you have to do. You don't have to do it, you get to do it. You don't have to do it, you get to do it. You don't have to do it, you get to do it. You get to impact people. You don't have to do it, you get to do it. And on the other side of it is the kind of impact that leaves legacies like the one that just this little story that illustrates in my own family. I really want to encourage you as you wrap up this story to see not generosity through the lens of obligation, but rather invitation. Okay, I'm gonna say it again. Not through obligation, but invitation. Invitation, not just to make impact, but I think there's actually something deeper and better, okay? And here's kind of the heart of what we're gonna talk about as we dive into Mark 12. It's an invitation. When you are generous, you are being invited into imaging God. You're being invited into imaging God, putting on display the very character and nature of who God is. If you're not generous, you can't fully image God. Because God is deeply, fundamentally generous. And even, as we'll see in this passage, the most hidden, overseen, seemingly meaningless in the corner of the room acts of generosity get the glimpse of Jesus, get the attention of Jesus, grasp the heart of Jesus, because Jesus, the God-man, is deeply, fundamentally generous. You can't fully image God without being generous. You are invited into fully imaging him in your invitation into generosity. So as we dive into this idea, okay, of generosity is an invitation to image God, let's do three things, okay? We're gonna look at the context, so I'm just gonna set the scene, then we're gonna look at the scene itself, and then we're gonna ask ourselves the question, what does this have to do for our lives? How is this gonna change the way that we live on Monday, okay? Now, I just read this passage, you might be familiar with it, you might be new to church. If you've been around church, you might have heard this story. Sometimes it's called the story of the widow's offering, and we'll dive into why this is such a powerful story, or if you've been around church, why it's such a famous story that you might have some familiarity with. Let me set some context, because what's important to understand is that this scene, it's not an isolated incident in the life of Jesus, but it's rather a very purposeful juxtaposition. All right, it's not an isolated incident, it's a very purposeful juxtaposition. And it's a purposeful juxtaposition between those who pretend to represent God, to image God, and a woman who reflects and images the heart of Jesus, really unlike anybody else who is in the room. Now, here's the scene of what's going on. We're towards the end of Jesus' life. There's been a thing, we celebrate this on Palm Sunday, of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. After he goes into Jerusalem, he goes into the temple that was supposed to be the place that would image who God is to the nations. But instead, he finds it being a den of thieves. People are selling and taking advantage of people. Jesus famously turns over the tables, and then he leaves. That's what happens after that. He leaves, he does some teaching with his disciples, and then he re-enters back into the temple. That's where we are in the life of Jesus. Jesus has turned over the temples. He's freaked everybody out. He's had a lot of conflict. He's left, and now he's re-entered. And consequently, you should feel a little bit of tenseness as Jesus goes in, kind of like, how is this going to go? Okay? This isn't a perfect analogy. I don't love this because it's not like a one-for-one correlation, but it's like, you know when two people have had a major blow up? So let's just make it very practical. Maybe like you grew up in a home where your mom and your dad had a major blow up and dad would just leave and you'd be like, I know he's coming back, but I'm not sure when. And then he would come back in and you're kind of like, how are mom and dad gonna be around each other? Now, I don't love that because like, I'm not trying to say Jesus leaving or re-entering was like any sort of sin or something like that. But you know that tenseness you feel in your stomach of like, how are you two going to talk to each other? How is this gonna go? That's like Jesus re-entering back into the temple, and you have Jesus and then you have the religious leaders, and you're like, oh snap, the last time I saw you guys interact with each other was very tense, and now you're seeing each other after a little bit of a break. How is this going to go? And what's amazing is Jesus re-enters spit and fire, beloved. Jesus re-enters and he goes from the defensive to the offensive, and he says something very, very strong. He says, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. So Jesus re-enters back into the temple and he pronounces a word of judgment on these wicked religious leaders. By the way, hey, if you have deep anger, healthy anger, and deep hurt from people in religious authority who have misused that and abused that, you know who else's heart is really angry at that? Jesus. Like some of Jesus' strongest words in the totality of his life was reserved for this scene when he saw religious leaders who were not shepherding and loving and caring, but rather abusing, dismissing, and hurting. Right here, and he gives this pronouncement upon them that condemnation is coming for them. That's the context for this scene. Now, here's what's really interesting, okay? So let's go here to this scene. Let's look down at, if you have a Bible in front of you, look at verse 41. We'll have it up here on the screen. So verse 40, Jesus just talked about these religious leaders who prey on the vulnerable. He says they devour widows' houses. And then this really wild thing happens where a widow walks into the room, right? If you were there watching the scene go down, you should be like, that's crazy. We were just talking about widows, right? That's wild. What is about to happen? He says they devour widows' houses. Now, a widow, in this first century context in which Jesus was speaking, I mean, today it's the same way, but even in an escalated fashion in the first century, a widow was maybe the most vulnerable individual in the totality of the society. And these leaders, rather than imaging God, leading, protecting, shepherding, Jesus says, I see what you do, and you exploit these people, and you devour them. You take advantage of them. And then, just as Jesus is talking about widows, a widow walks into the room. So here's what happens in verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. So people would come to the temple, and as an act of devotion, they would give their money. It says, many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put 2 small copper coins. Now, before we even kind of apply this, let me make this observation. This is supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. Do you see the contrast there? Rich people, lots of money. Poor woman, almost nothing. This is sort of like, I know that I'm running out of time for this reference to be relevant because this show started like 25 years ago now or something like that. But do we have any Office fans here? Okay, fans of The Office. I feel like this is the perfect illustration if you watch The Office, and if you didn't, I'm sorry, and just come back in 2 minutes, okay? But here's the thing. Do you remember I thought of this morning, so hopefully this works. But remember that episode in The Office when they do the Yankee swap at Christmas? And everybody's supposed to bring in a gift that's like under $5, and then Michael brings the video iPod, and then everybody feels like ashamed. Like Phyllis feels ashamed that she handmade this oven mitt because it's like, well, it's not a video iPod, right? You know that scene, or you've had that before, where it's like it's Christmas and somebody gets like, you came in with like a $5 Target gift card because that's the best you can do, and somebody's like, oh, I actually just had enough for a PS5, and you feel like, what? Oh, okay, this contrast when somebody gives a ton and somebody comes in with an oven mitt, okay? That's sort of the awkwardness of this scene of wealthy people making big demonstrations, video iPods, look at how much I have, look at how much I'm giving, and then you have the widow who comes in with 2 copper coins. In the Greek, it's the word lepton, which basically is like the smallest unit of currency that exists. We're talking about such a small amount of money. If you found it in the parking lot on your way out here this morning, you'd probably be like, I don't think I want to pick it up because I'm not sure if I want to wash my hands. We're just talking in a totally, from an earthly perspective, a totally insignificant amount of money. But Jesus marvels at the scene. He calls his disciples over. He sees this as a teaching moment in their formation, and he says, I want to show you something. I don't know, it's like, I kind of think, like, I try to be intentional with this with my kids, but like with my kids, ages 9, 6, 3, and 2, appropriate to their ages, you have these things that pop up in the ebb and flow of life, and you try to make them teaching moments and just say, hey, come over here, let me show you this real quick. Let me make this observation real quick. It's like Jesus is doing that with the disciples. Hey, come over here real quick. I want to show you, I want to make this moment a teaching moment in your development and your formation as a follower of me. So Jesus, verse 43, called the disciples to him and said to them, I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. Now, this is where, if you're thinking critically about what Jesus is saying, you should be like, Jesus, are you bad at math? Because that's not more, right? Like think about it critically. Is it more or less? It's less, right? But Jesus said it's more. So you'd be like, well, that doesn't make sense. Either Jesus is trying to make a different point in the way that God understands the heart of generosity, or he's just bad at math. So what is it? Okay, so it's almost like he anticipates anybody who's reading this would say, what are you talking about here? For they, that's the rich people, all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. If you actually translated that last phrase, all she had to live on, very, very literally, it would be something along the lines of, but she, out of her poverty, gave everything away, even her own life. Like, you know that moment where you get pushed to give and it's such a level of discomfort because you're like, if I give this, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make rent next month, like that type of generosity. That's what she's demonstrating here. Is like not sort of convenient generosity of like, ugh, I guess I'll have to have one less meal at Illegal Pete's or something like that. And like eat mac and cheese at home. Even though that's significant, I'm not trying to be dismissive of that. There's something deeper happening here in the type of generosity she's demonstrating. She is giving, not really being sure if everything is going to be okay as a result. We would say almost it's irresponsible generosity. Like if she had a financial manager, he would have encouraged her to not do this. And so you have this striking scene of juxtaposition. Jesus, who is God, in the room, looking at the religious leaders of the day and saying, I hate this. I condemn this. This doesn't reflect me. This doesn't image who I am. And then you've got Jesus, who is God, looking at this widow and saying, I love this. I don't condemn her. I actually commend her. I exalt her. I focus my disciples' attention upon her. This reflects me. This images me. This is my heart on display. Now, let's apply this to our lives and let's talk about kind of what's this coming week and thinking about generosity and how do we demonstrate it. So the question we should be asking then is why? Like, why does this get the attention of Jesus? Even just think about this. Think about the fact that this got Jesus' attention. Because what typically gets attention? What gets people's names put on college dorm rooms and wings of stadiums and things like that? It's that they gave a lot, not a little, right? But here's like this upside down nature of the kingdom on display, that the woman who gives the least gets the most attention from Jesus. Why is that? Why is it that that should be weird to us? Why does the woman who gives the least get the most attention and commendation from Jesus? I would say it's because it's imaging, reflecting, grabbing the gaze and the heart and the image of Jesus, unlike anybody else who was in the room. Remember what we said on the front end? Generosity is not an obligation, it's an invitation to fully image God. And beloved, I don't know what you think about God, and you might be somebody who's followed Jesus for many, many years, or you might be trying to figure out who Jesus is. But here's one of the things I want you to take away with, if you don't come away with anything else, is the very identity of Jesus is he is deeply, fundamentally generous. He is so deeply generous. God is abundantly generous. I heard somebody say this recently, so this isn't mine, but I'm just passing it on. I was thinking about this. All right, so let me ask you this question as you just think about the generosity of God. We'll start here. If I had been like, hey, I'm gonna do like a weird special guest speaker thing and been like, I have a check in my Bible for $10 million to whoever wants it, who would take it? No strings attached. Who would take it? Right? Like, I know you're like afraid to raise your hand because you're like, what is he gonna say next? But let's say there were no strings attached. I would say you would probably take it, right? And you would probably be relieved by it and be like, hey, maybe I can finally buy a house in Boulder. I can give some money away. I can travel and see my family. Like, you probably get a fixer-upper in Boulder for $10 million, right? Is that about what, right? Okay, but what if I said, hey, there's one catch. You don't get to wake up tomorrow. Would you take it? No, like nobody would take it. Why? Because we all recognize the gift of the breath that fills up our lungs and wakes us up every morning is the most valuable thing that has ever been gifted to us already. Regardless of what you believe about who God is, you recognize that reality in your life. And you, regardless of your educational background, regardless of like the cool startup you might be working for, regardless of how talented you might be, regardless of how many degrees you have, did nothing to will yourself into existence. It was given to you by the God who fearfully and wonderfully made you in his image. If you have breath that fills up your lungs, which by the way is all of us right now in this moment, you have been on the other side of the abundant, free generosity of God. He is deeply generous to us. I know instinctually, and I fall into this trap too, loved ones by God. So this is not a condemnation. It's just kind of naming a reality. It's easy to see our lives exclusively through the lens of what we don't yet have, rather than seeing the magnitude of what we've received. And the very breath that fills our lungs is such that we should wake up every day with a sense of worship and wonder of, isn't it amazing that God loves me and has provided for me in this particular way? God is abundantly generous. Here's the second thing. Is God is content for much of his generosity to be hidden. Okay? I'll talk about this. I'll elaborate on this and connect it to Mark 12 here in a second, but I don't want to lose this point. Here's the thing. Okay, so how many of us, let's be participatory here. All right, let's raise a hand if you have breath that fills up your lungs right now, okay? I think that's all of us. Okay, how many of us woke up this morning? How many of us woke up this morning? Maybe not emotionally yet, but at least physically you woke up. And how many of us gave thanks to God for another day of existing? Some of you did, which is amazing. I didn't. I was just like, I got to get ready. I got to get prepared. My 4 kids are going to be an adventure to get ready for church. This is going to be hard. It's going to fall more on my wife because I'm getting ready to do this. I hope we get out on time. I hope, for me, I didn't wake up being like, wow, another day of breath that fills up oh my God, like the most precious thing that somebody can possess was given to me by God. And he didn't kill me. Like I thought nothing of the gift and he didn't take it away. Right? Like a lot of times we get really cynical and angry when it's like, did you get the gift? Did you get the gift? Did you get the gift? Like I feel this where like one of the things that we love to do is we just love to send people like Uber Eats gift cards. And I almost wish they didn't do this, but they notify you when the person has received the gift, open the gift, and use the gift. And there's this little thing in my heart that's kind of like, are you gonna tell me thank you for the gift? Right? Like, you ever feel that way when you get somebody a gift and you're like, are you gonna say thank you? Are you gonna say thank you? Thank God that God isn't like that towards us. Thank God that God is content for us to take total advantage and lack total awareness of the magnitude of what he's gifted to us. I think this is why Jesus' gaze was on this widow, is because her generosity was so hidden, right? Like, nobody else saw it. People saw the rich guy making this big display, video iPod, look at that guy over there. Oh my gosh, look at how generous he is. But here's this widow who comes in with almost nothing. 2 little copper coins, dink, dink, disappears back into the crowd. And when nobody else saw, you know who saw? Jesus saw. Isn't that amazing? When nobody else sees, Jesus sees. When nobody else sees, Jesus sees. When nobody else sees, Jesus sees. That should stir us to a place not just of worship, of God's hidden generosity towards us, but it should empower us to demonstrate hidden generosity in the spheres of influence that we've been entrusted with by God as well. Because we exist in a cultural moment where a lot of times we wonder if generosity is even worth sharing if people don't know about it, right? Anybody know anybody? I know that's nobody in the room, but you know somebody who kind of is like waiting for the camera to be on to do something good, right? Right, they're kind of like, hey, if this isn't captured in a video that's share-worthy, I'm not sure if it's worth doing at all. We exist in a highly narcissistic moment where a lot of times there's the pressure of like, if nobody knows about it, is it even worth doing? It is. It is. It's not only equal, but it achieves the unique gaze of Jesus, because there's something about hidden generosity that taps into the generosity of the heart of God, the generous heart of God. And in this moment, when it feels like nobody else sees, Jesus sees. And he calls the disciples close to him to make sure that they see as well. You know what that means? You know what that means? It means if you are a mom who stays at home with your kids and changes diapers and you get no thank yous, and the only feedback you get is that toddler screaming at you that you're changing their diaper, and what you kind of feel is like, I don't really want to be doing this either, right? And that's the rhythm of your life for years. That hidden generosity that it feels like nobody sees, you know what's really good news? Is when it feels like nobody else sees, Jesus sees. Jesus sees. Hey, I don't know if any of you are teachers, but I'll tell you, teaching is this kind of experience, and I think particularly in an environment like Boulder, where it's hidden and you don't make enough money and you're barely trying to survive, and then you're under-resourced and you're underfunded, and you're having to like pray that somebody meets your Amazon wish list for teaching supplies that you want and you put out there, and then nobody meets it because every other teacher's having to do that. And then as a consequence, you're already having to dip into funds which are short altogether to make sure that your third graders have glue sticks, and nobody throws a parade for you. When it feels like nobody sees, Jesus sees. There is something about hidden generosity that nobody else sees, that achieves the unique gaze of God. Third, okay, so God is abundantly generous. He's content for his generosity to be hidden, and he's content for his generosity to be sacrificial. There's something about this widow's generosity that is so deeply sacrificial that it taps into the sacrificially generous heart of Jesus. Again, I'll take you back to that line at the very end of this passage when it says, but she, out of her poverty, she gave everything away, even her own life. God gives, beloved, not just abundantly, but he gives sacrificially. It makes me think of Romans 8, when Paul says, but he who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? The heart of God is to give to a place that it hurts. Hurts in the deepest way. I mean, we can only speculate. But Jesus is just a few short hours from sacrificially dying on the cross to take away the sins of the world. And he looks at this woman giving, even though it's going to cost her her own life. And no wonder it achieved the gaze of Jesus, because he was about to not just figuratively, but literally give of his own life. The Father was going to give of the Son for the sake of the forgiveness of our sins. Beloved, the God who gave you the very breath that fills up your lungs, and most of us go throughout our days without even thinking about, that God who gave us that gift, and that we, both by nature and by choice, have chosen not to love and worship and obey, but rather reject and run away from. That God has loved us to such a degree, rather than cynically standing off at a distance and letting us go our own way, he drew near. And God sent his Son out of heaven into history to live this abundantly generous life, abundantly obedient so that we could be righteous in a way that we could never achieve on our own, abundantly forgiving, dying on the cross in our place for the forgiveness of our sins so that we could achieve the forgiveness we could never earn, abundantly victorious because he resurrected from the grave, conquering Satan, sin, death, and hell. And you know what? By grace through faith, the free gift of God is salvation. And the only thing you need to do is to ask for it and to receive it. You don't have to do anything for it. Does anybody else give in that way? Does anybody else give in that way? God's generosity is abundant, it is sacrificial, but it's for you as well. It's for you to receive, and it's also for you to be transformed by and to demonstrate and to model and to image in the flow of your life as well. So here's what I want to do as we close. I want to ask one single question. I want to ask the Holy Spirit for him to propel our hearts to discern what he is calling us into in this coming week. So here's the one question, is where am I being called to image God through generosity in this coming week? God might bring to mind a neighbor, a family member, a need, your church, starting giving here. I'm not sure what it is, but whatever it is, ask that question. Let's take a time to pray, focus on this for a little bit. Where is God calling me? Where is he inviting me to image him through abundant, possibly hidden, sacrificial generosity in this coming week? So Spirit of God who lives in our hearts and pours into our hearts the fact that we are loved, would you bring in the hearts and the minds of the women and men in this room a sense of clarity of what you're calling us into? Jesus, you tell us that we don't want to just be hearers of the word, but doers of the word. Wise individuals are the ones who hear from you and then do what you tell us to do. Would you please tell us what to do in this coming week so that we might image and reflect you to those around us?